Toronto, and I am the chair of the Executive Committee. Need to pull that down. There we go. We've got to keep up with the technology here. I'm John Tory, the Mayor of Toronto, and I'm the chair of the Executive Committee, and the clerk has confirmed that we have quorum for this virtual meeting. So I would welcome you to the special meeting of the Executive Committee of the City of Toronto to consider the 2021 budget. Today's meeting is being held by video conference. City staff are also connecting to the meeting by video conference, as of course are you members of the public. As City Hall remains closed, the public will continue to participate electronically and can watch this meeting streaming live on YouTube at youtube.com/Toronto City Council Live. And I do ask people for their patience with respect to any technical issues that may come up over the course of the day. The City Clerk has provided all agenda materials on the Clerk's meeting portal. Clerk's IT staff are available to you remotely if you need help with your devices. That's directed to the members of the committee, of course, and to our staff. I would like to remind staff to keep their mics muted and their videos turned off unless they are in the process of answering questions or speaking to the committee. This just makes it easier for me as chair and for the staff, the clerks watching on YouTube, to observe members as they participate in the debate and vote on items. Members, I would ask that you please also keep your mics muted unless you wish to question staff or speak to an item, and please ensure that your video is left turned on. Members, I also want to remind you that you have to submit and approve your motions by email. Staff are available at exc@toronto.ca to help with motions. If there are any visiting members of the Council attending the meeting, I encourage you to turn your video on as well so that I will know you are present and can recognize you to speak or ask questions as appropriate. And this will also assist the Clerk's staff to record attendance for the meeting. Although we are in different locations and meeting remotely today, the committee would like to acknowledge, and the city, the land we are meeting on is the traditional territory of many nations, including the Mississaugas of the Credit, the Anishinaabe, the Haudenosaunee, and the Wendat peoples, and is now home to many First Nations and Métis peoples. We also acknowledge that Toronto is covered by Treaty 13 with the Mississaugas of the Credit. I should mention one more thing, which is that just for those who are not aficionados at watching budget meetings, especially the special meeting of the Executive Committee to consider the budget, because we had public hearings, virtual public hearings, and heard many deputants. I was in attendance at those myself, together with Councillor Crawford and other members of the Budget Committee and members of Council. We do not hear additional deputations at this meeting. There's been a more extensive process of deputations held on multiple occasions with the budget in hand leading up to this meeting, so we don't hear separate deputations again today. We've done it in the preceding weeks, and that's just in case you were expecting that there would be people from the public that we would hear from on the budget today. That process unfolded a couple of weeks ago. So we've reached the time now where we ask for any declarations of interest under the Municipal Conflict of Interest Act. If you do have an interest, please raise your hand and unmute your mic and state the nature of that interest, and also there's of course a paper to be filed. And I will just start off, and I don't know if there are any others. In my case, I would like to declare the following interest because of my continuing involvement with the Rogers Family Trusts, and it is in regard to Rogers Communications Inc., which does provide telephone and cellular services, wireless services, internet and Wi-Fi services to the City of Toronto. And so I have an interest in the 2021 Information and Technology Operating Budget, the Toronto Police Services Budget, the TTC budget, and the Toronto Community Housing Budget, all of which end up directly or indirectly being considered today, specifically as it pertains to funds allocated to expansion and provision of telephone, wireless, internet, and television services, and a second interest relative to the 2021 Strategic Communications Budget as it pertains to funds allocated for the provision of news summary services provided by Canada Newswire, and I will file the appropriate document with the clerk. Are there other declarations of interest that members of the committee wish to put on the record as provided for this morning? Okay. Well, seeing none, then we can proceed. And we have three items on the agenda today. The first item is EX 21.1, 2021 property tax rates and related matters. And there is a staff report with recommendations, and I wonder if members have questions of staff or wish to speak. We can start off with questions of staff. Are there questions of staff on this matter? Okay. Then people wishing to speak to this staff report with recommendations. All right, and then I would ask, and I'm sure it's normally the case, we would ask the Budget Chief, Councillor Crawford, to move the recommendations of the staff on this item. And we could have those displayed, but I think everybody has them in front of them. And it's actually, if you look at it with all the different classes, including farmlands, I'm not sure how many places there are left in the city, but all those things that are set out in the recommendations in the staff report, I think it probably doesn't serve any useful purpose to set out the detailed recommendations, but they're there, and they've been, of course, made public for some time now in accordance with the provided rules. So I'll call the question then, and I'll ask one more time if anybody wishes to speak. Okay, I'll call the question. All those in favour? Show of hands, please. Opposed? Carried unanimously. Thank you very much. I will also then, unless there are any questions or speakers, move adoption of the item EX 21.3, which is more of a, I'll call it housekeeping matter. It's EX 21.3, response to Ontario Regulation 286/09, budget matters, expenses. Are there any questions of staff on this item? Okay, seeing none, are there any people wishing to speak to this item? All right, again, seeing none, I will call the question on EX 21.3. All those in favour? Opposed? You're opposed, Councillor Ainsley? Or are you in favour? Okay, I just saw your hand went up a little late there. Okay, double thumbs up. The motion is carried unanimously. Okay, so the item on which we will spend most of our time today, quite properly so, is item EX 21.2. 2021 capital and operating budgets, and we will have a brief presentation from the Chief Financial Officer and Treasurer and the City Manager on this item. And may I just say, because I think it's an appropriate time to say this at the beginning as opposed to at the end of the meeting where some people may have drifted off to other things. This has been, by any measure that I've ever seen, I mean, and I've had many years looking after very large budgets in corporate life, but I've been mayor for 6 years and working together with Councillor Crawford that entire time on budgets, plural. This has been the most extraordinary budget I've ever worked on because of what was an unbelievable situation in which we found ourselves when we first sat down to take account of where we were perhaps in late March or early April of last year. And at the time, we had a situation, as those outside who are the citizens and the people we represent and serve will understand, where we were suddenly confronted by the possibility, indeed the probability, of being short billions of dollars in revenue. The number ended up being around 2.2 when we started off on this exercise. And, you know, there are days you walk into a room like that and think there is no answer to deal with something like that. And I will just say that because of incredible work done, led by Councillor Crawford, but also by our Chief Financial Officer and our City Manager and a very dedicated staff, we have come to the point today where we can present a budget, and there will be lots of opinions on that budget here in a City Council and from people out there that are watching. But I will say that the budget is something that has resulted from an incredible amount of unprecedented hard work. And I will say we've benefited from, and we'll speak to this later, the support of the other governments in helping us. But a lot of the work's been done here as well in terms of many different things that have been done to reconcile differing interests and to identify savings and efficiencies. And I just want to say thank you, because whatever your view is on the budget, we owe an immense debt of gratitude to our public servants, led by our City Manager and Chief Financial Officer and their whole team of people for the work they've done to get us to this stage, starting from a place that I couldn't have believed if somebody had told me in advance it was going to be that. So I want to say thank you at this stage, and on that note, ask them if they will take us through a brief presentation about the budget that is going to be considered here today.
So thank you very much, Mayor Tory and members of Executive Committee and any visiting members that are attending right now. As you point out, very much want to thank Heather and Steve and of course Julie, Tracy, and Josie, and all the senior leaders, as well as all the other staff that have been working for the last several months to put this budget together. As you know, we launched the budget on January 14th, and at that time we made clear that our operating and rate budget was in the order of approximately $14 billion, as well as our 10-year capital program in the order of $45 billion. So what's transpired in the last month have been a number of meetings, obviously, but we have heard very clearly from members of our community as well as you as to what your concerns, what your interests are. And today we're going to update you on the progress that has been made. All of you know very well that budgets are not just expressions of what our legislative commitments are, but also of the values and the important matters that affect our citizens and our businesses day after day. And together with staff and obviously you as elected officials, we have to make some tough decisions as to how it is that we are going to continue to deliver services at what is an affordable amount of money. Of course, what has affected all of us, it goes without saying, is COVID. This time last year, I think we had somewhere in the order of about less than 100 cases. And as of 2 days ago, we've topped the 90,000 case mark and sadly have lost over 2,500 of our citizens. If we can go to the next slide, please, the one regarding COVID impacts. So I have about an 8-slide presentation here, so it'll just take a few minutes. Of course, what you have in front of you is very much a COVID sensitive budget. So obviously we are still in the midst of COVID, so we are still responding, but equally important is the fact that we have a strategy for not just this year, but years to come in terms of how it is that we recover, rebuild, and prosper as a community. And we have given you information as to what we think the challenges are next year as revenues and expenses are likely to still be affected. So, of course, this year programs have been impacted due to the health measures that our good doctor has advised us on, as well as the province. So we have had to scale back on library services, recreational programs, seniors programs, and many others as a result of people not being able to physically be in those spaces enjoying those services. And of course, we have to redirect resources that typically we would have executing our services, but we've redirected them to deal with the problems or the challenges that COVID has presented us. By way of example, we are, as you know, we launched or announced our vaccine program with 9 facilities that we're going to be responsible for. It takes hundreds and hundreds of people in order to execute those programs, but some of which come from our own rank and file, others come from the community. So important for people to realize that, we have people working in important parts of our organization to meet our pandemic needs. And of course, in this presentation is going to mention a number of times the importance of our relationship with the government of Canada and the province of Ontario. Next slide, please. So you heard this when we were in the midst of COVID. This budget at the end of the day is here to protect lives and livelihoods. And so when we were talking about COVID, we had said we needed to save lives, not overwhelm the healthcare system, but also save livelihoods. And so that still remains the case today. So as I mentioned, we are maintaining an emergency response to COVID. And of course, as I mentioned, we've adjusted and introduced services where required to help mitigate the effects of the measures that we've had to take in order to protect people, but also to support businesses as they have to transition from normal service delivery to delivery that is now becoming almost normal to us. And so I'll get into details of that in a minute. We heard very loud and clear last summer when we were working with residents, but also business owners, the importance of keeping taxes affordable. In our particular case this year, we are recommending a 0.7% increase in property tax. That's related to inflation. There's an additional, as we know, 1.5% increase, which was initiated last year in order to ensure that we take care of important capital investments, both in terms of transit and in housing. So together, we are talking a 2.2% increase. And of course, I think we can't lose sight of the fact that, prosperity has to benefit all. It can't be a matter of the rich get richer and everyone else struggles. As we've seen in COVID, we knew we had challenges before COVID ever happened, but we have seen a number of our good people in this community affected. Certainly our Black, our Indigenous, and our people of color as well. There's been a heavy price paid by women in our community that have lost their employment. and now are struggling. And so it is incumbent upon us to, when we think of prosperity moving forward, to address those inequities. But also, we've heard loud and clear that the mental health of people has absolutely been stretched and has been impacted, and so that is becoming increasingly an issue that we can't ignore, and we need to work with other levels of government on that. And of course, climate action. The evidence is overwhelming. We must continue to make significant investments in climate action measures to ensure that we are positioned to be those cities around the world that are resilient and able to deal with the changes in temperature and precipitation, etc. Next slide. The most important part of our whole budget process is what we hear. So we've had 116 public deputations, 83 email submissions, and of course, through the course of our meetings, there have been a number of questions that you have asked or members of council have asked, which has led to 52 briefing notes and 16 supplemental reports. And so, thematically, what we've heard very clearly was the inequities that are persisting and how they need to be addressed. Certainly, we need to protect our communities. We need to, stay vigilant on climate action. Housing, as you all know, has been a persistent challenge for the City of Toronto, but there's been significant progress made, as well as we've heard issues around mobility. Our police budget was certainly part of the conversation, and people's opinions in terms of what is too much taxation, what is not enough taxation. So all of that is manifested in the briefing notes that have addressed those issues. And of course, part of that has been the concern that, and I'll get to the specific gap itself of the federal and provincial government support, which they have obviously provided tremendous support in 2020 and again in 2021, but that we're going to have to continue to rely on that support to deal with some of the challenges, which I'm going to talk about in a minute. And of course, not to lose sight, as much as we are so focused on dealing with the day-to-day realities of COVID, it was incumbent upon us that we did look at the future in 2022 and beyond in terms of how are we going to recover. And so the Toronto Office of Recovery and Rebuild did come up with a number of recommendations and responses, which I'm going to talk about here in 2 seconds. Next slide, please. I think this is very important to remind people. When we were this time last year, we were not in the midst of really COVID at all. And so we had a very successful budget. I think the first time it was unanimously approved. And then, of course, the world unfolded. Overall, we were originally projecting somewhere in the order of about $2.2 billion in challenges. And of course, that's driven by lost revenues and rising expenses. The number settled in last year in $1.7 billion. I want to stress, though, what you see in front of you, $534 million was the amount of money that the City of Toronto, through its mitigation strategies, came up with to try to offset that $1.7 billion challenge. And of course, through Safe Restart funding, we were able to secure $505 million as well as $669 million from obviously both levels of government. So, we can't say enough about the government of Canada and the province of Ontario being there to address this extraordinary situation. What's different this year, though, is that we were able to develop a budget, understanding that, yes, COVID is here. Its impacts are going to be felt again in terms of revenues and in expenses. And again, as you would expect us to do, you would expect us to come to the table with our savings. And so our projection for 2021 is the order of $1.6 billion. What you have in our budget is $573 million worth of strategy, if you will, and reflecting the reality of the services that we are going to deliver. And when we launched the budget, we knew that we had, in terms of, again, Safe Restart funding, $740 million, which of course meant that we had an $856 million gap that we would be turning to the federal and provincial government to help us in some way. And so if we can, I just want to move to the next slide. So since we launched the budget on January 14th, I mean, there has been obviously some very good news. And we reported last week through one of our briefing notes that the gap that we've been talking about of $856 million has been reduced to $649 million. And so, again, a lot of that is in response to the public health costs that are significant, as well as other revenue pressures that we've had. And so we have been able to identify, as pointed out here, about $207 million worth of support that we've received from the upper levels of government. So that's incredibly important to point out. It doesn't mean that we're out of the woods yet as it relates to the challenges that we're facing, but it does stress the importance of the relationship that you, Mr. Mayor, and your colleagues have established with the Government of Canada and the Province of Ontario. And I know there's a lot of work that goes on behind the scenes in the way of communicating our challenges. And certainly that is very much the reason why we are in the position that we're in today, and remain very hopeful that the Government of Canada, Province of Ontario, is going to continue to recognize the circumstances that we're facing. And I can say from a intergovernmental standpoint, and even a Greater Toronto Hamilton regional standpoint, the level of conversation and the relationships that have been established over certainly the last 12 months are significant. This is my 13th year as the city manager, and I must admit that the types of conversations that we're having with our colleagues, at least administratively, I know have been very, very positive. And so, of course, we've been reporting on a number of things to you since the budget launch. And Denise seems to be featuring in a lot of them. The first two relating to certainly the vaccination strategy that we have to make sure that our Black community is aware and is going to participate in that program. And there's been a lot of work through our community agencies to accomplish that, as well as the challenge that we have when people experience mental health issues and how best to deal with them. I know for a long time, a lot of that service delivery was expected on the shoulders of our police force, but there's now a program that has been put in front of you that speaks to how it is that we can maybe address this a lot differently. And of course, next year we will have 4 pilots that we're going to be testing, if you will, in the community to ensure that there's a different way and maybe more effective way of addressing some of the issues that people have living out their lives here. And of course, from a climate action standpoint, it was concerning to us that the impression was that we were holding off, or we were cutting back in some way, shape, or form on our climate action investments. And as you well know, in our capital program, there's over $400 million of climate action related work, I think some 600 projects. And that, yes, our Jim Baxter and his team has done a great job of pointing a way forward, but that load is really shared by many of the programs in our organization. And of course, Heather presented to you the Environmental, Social, and Governance Report, which is new for municipalities, not just here in Toronto, but the country, but a way in which that, we can express how it is our budget is addressing, climate action, certainly the equity challenges that we're facing in governance overall, and so on. So a lot has been done since our budget launch. And if we can, the next slide, please. Yes, recovery strategy, as we refer to it, the TOR report, which was presented to you in October with a covering report from myself. I'm happy to report that a lot of work has in fact been done with respect to the 83 recommendations that are in that report. As we committed to you, we will come back quarterly to give you an update as to how those recommendations have been addressed. And I'm pleased to report that 59 of the 83 recommendations have been actioned, meaning simply that the work is already underway on them, and there are various schedules as to when they will be completed. Another 18 of those recommendations are being reviewed so that they can be put into action with schedules and with people committed to them. And then 4 of those actions are very much ongoing. They actually never do end. And then the remaining 2 are ones that are completed. So this is an example of some of the work. I'm not going to read it all to you, but to know that there will be a report coming in the coming weeks to report specifically on those 83 actions, and that they are part of this budget that we have in front of you. I think we're especially proud, though. I just will point out to the federal government's rapid housing program that's given us $203 million to invest in housing, which has resulted in 7 projects being initiated, bringing on to our community 540 units of housing. So all of that, I think, is very important, is not to mention as well as the work that you saw at council last week in terms of Cafe TO and Curb TO. So a lot of good things obviously are happening with respect to our recovery strategy.
Okay,
Next
so I'll
slide.
call right now. Okay, bye.
Next slide. So this is my last slide. So, you know, we can't stress enough the importance of working with our federal and provincial governments. I mean, they have certainly delivered in terms of our last year challenges and this year as well. That's our expectation. And yes, it will take a whole of government as well as a GTHA strategy, I think, to have us working together as a collection of municipality on matters such as transit and housing, digital infrastructure, procurement, and financial sustainability. These are all topics that are in front of the city managers and CAOs. In fact, I'll be meeting tomorrow with a group of them on this. And again, I want to point out something that I think did come up through the course of some of the conversations. What I've described for you are the COVID pressures that have resulted in about almost $650 million in gap. And again, that's as a result of lost revenues and costs. But we still have a responsibility, as we've been doing for the last few years, to receive funding from our federal government regarding refugees. We started in 2019 and again in 2020. And this year we are expecting the federal government to provide us with $61 million in refugee funding. And as well, there's an expectation from the province of Ontario for $15 million in supportive housing. So these are ongoing services that we deliver and are expected to have some oversight over, but certainly the costs for them relate to responsibilities of the Government of Canada and province of Ontario, respectively. Our debt strategy, as you well know, is to maintain a 15% ceiling. That 15% is related to the amount of property tax that we collect annually. It's not, I know it's come up, it's not advisable from our perspective to increase that debt ceiling. We do think that there is a direct correlation with our credit rating if we start to expend beyond that amount. So we do encourage us to stay the course in terms of our capital program. And on that, as you know, it's a 10-year, $45 billion program. We had recast the capital works last year. What was concerning, I know, to a few of us was the amount of work that was getting completed, which was just slightly over 60%. Happy to report in 2020, as a result of taking maybe a finer lens and a more strategic approach to capital, we are now in excess of 80%, which is really the norm that I've witnessed amongst municipalities. And of course, we have adjusted service levels to respond to public health measures that are being taken. So that is the presentation. Hopefully you find that helpful. And needless to say, we're ready to answer any questions that you have.
Thank you. Pardon me. Thank you, Chris. And so now the time has come for questions of staff, and the way I think we've done this in prior years, we will continue with that practice, which is to have questions asked by members as they wish across the entire realm of the budgets, and we can have more than one round as needed to get the job done in terms of the questions that remain to be asked at this stage of the process. So I will take note of those who wish to ask questions and recognize you accordingly. And we're going to start with the Budget Chief, Councillor Crawford.
Mr. Mayor, and again, I want to thank staff for the incredible work that they've done. I guess I want to talk to you, probably the CFO on our balancing strategy. As the city manager has just pointed out, we are balanced, but it's on really the backs of right now, luckily, it's a $649 million backstop with our capital with regard to before we get funding from the other levels of government. So can you just talk a bit about how that impacts, number one, our, the two different areas that you've really broken it down into two areas on, our CFCs along with the tax stabilization account, and just give a broad understanding of how we have balanced with those two strategies to manage that 649 million?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, Councillor. So as you mentioned, there are two components to our balancing strategy. The gap that we have to have a backstop for is 649 million. We know that the reserves on their own are not sufficient to fill that entire gap. So what we've done is we have split the backstop between CFC and debt and the tax stabilization reserve. So that means that we've taken 324 million out of the reserve and put that aside as a backstop measure. And I just want to emphasize, obviously, this is not our priority. This is not our wish to proceed this way. We just have to ensure that we have a balanced budget so that we have a backstop measure. The 324 million that's coming out of the tax stabilization reserve goes against the monies that would have otherwise gone to capital in 2020, but they are sitting in that reserve as a COVID backstop. What we're doing is we're looking at the reserve outside of that backstop measure, which is approximately 133 million. And that 133 million we do use as a comparison for the council policy of 2% of our tax revenues to have on hand. But I also want to mention there was something that was highlighted in the budget launch, is that we also have to ensure that for the backstop, we also have two other asks. One of the federal government for 61 million of refugees funding, and one of the provincial government for supportive housing of 15 million. So when you take our backstops off our tax stabilization reserve, we've actually dipped under the 2%, goal that we have to keep as a tax stabilization amount. Then if we switch over to the CFC approach, again, on an annual basis, we contribute to the capital plan. And what we've done in this instance is we've taken the other 50%, which is the CFC contribution. And in the event that we don't receive the funding, we would slow down our capital spend.
Thank you. And just a comment a bit, you mentioned about our debt and our credit rating and where we are in a debt ceiling, and just give a sense, and one of the questions I want to end with really is with the precarious nature of our reserves, our debt ceiling, that you are recommending no increases, or we should not be adding anything more to our debt. We should not be removing any more money from our reserves to be able to maybe make additions to the budget. So can you just comment on that debt ceiling component and why we got to be really, really prudent this year?
Okay, so the debt ceiling, just to highlight, in municipal finance, the debt servicing costs are both interest and principal repayments. And so there is a 15% debt servicing ceiling that council has decided on. Over the 10-year capital plan, our max amount is 14.82%. So we're right at the ceiling with the current debt, the debt projections. In the event that we were to exceed that 15%, we have worked with the credit rating agencies, we have talked to the banks, and they have confirmed that if we were to exceed the 15% and we were to increase the amount of debt that we were to take on, our AA credit rating would be downgraded. And that downgrading, so we've done different scenarios, and there is a briefing note coming to council next week. But what ends up happening is we would have a one-time opportunity to increase the debt. That, in actual fact, if we did some modeling around the impact on the credit rating to a single A from a AA, and it would increase our debt servicing costs by 20%. And that, in actual fact, is where then we look at that debt servicing cost and how much we would, in actual fact, have to take out of our operating budget. So one, we put our credit rating at risk. our interest rates go up and our debt servicing costs go up as well. So it's not our recommendation to increase the amount of debt that the city is carrying more than what the capital plan anticipates at this time.
Thank you, Councillor Crawford. That was the last in this round of your questions, but we can come back depending on your wish. And now I do see Councillor Layton here, and I just want to make sure, because I recognize the first hand that came up, but we do normally go to members of council who are not on the executive committee. I see Councillor Fletcher as well. And so if you had questions, I'm quite happy to recognize you first. Well, now it'll be second. But following the budget chief is probably fair for his first round. So would either of you, Councillor Fletcher, Councillor Layton, like to ask questions at this time?
Yeah, if I could just have, and it just two questions to our CFO.
Sure, please.
So at budget committee, you said that there was a concern that it would downgrade our bond rating. Has that been confirmed with is that what I heard correctly? It's been confirmed with the credit agencies? You have confirmed it's absolute fact that if we went above our debt ceiling, they would downgrade us.
Through you, Mr. Mayor, Councillor Layton, we have worked with one of the banks, and we've had discussions with the credit rating agencies to model what it would look like. So we have had discussions with each of those groups to understand the impacts.
So sorry, there's an important distinction here. We've worked with them to model the financial impacts to the city if we were downgraded. I understand that, and it would cost us 20 million if they downgraded us. Have they confirmed if they would downgrade us?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, Councillor, the credit rating agencies won't put anything in writing with regards to an absolute confirmation, but through conversations, we looked at what is the threshold that would create a downgrading, and I've laid out the scenario of what that would look like.
I'm sorry, because in your answers to the budget chief, you said quite specifically that they have confirmed they would downgrade, and now you're saying no, they have not confirmed they would downgrade, but we had confirmed what the impacts would be if they downgraded. Can I just make that? That's they're two distinct points.
Through you, Mr. Mayor, Councillor. They have verbally discussed with us how they would interpret us taking on additional debt. They have not put in writing a confirmation.
Okay. Could we just explore what I'm having a really difficult time finding what the debt ceilings are for other municipalities in Canada and North America. Do you know what they are? Like, what's Montreal's?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, Councillor, I'm happy to look into that for you.
But do you have any idea of where, so Vancouver, Montreal, Calgary, Edmonton, what their debt ceilings are?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, Councillor, I don't have that off the top of my head, no.
New York City, any other comparables? Like, do we seriously not know what any other municipalities' debt ceilings are?
Oh, wait, absolutely.
Mayor,
I just don't have it in front of me.
Oh, okay. So if there is a briefing note coming, it may be helpful to include some of that information about what other municipalities. I can find what their credit ratings are. I just can't find their debt ceiling. Thank you.
Thanks, Councillor Layton. Just before we go back off to members of the committee, did Councillor Fletcher have some questions to ask?
No, I'm fine. Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'm just listening in today.
Thank you,
I have some comments later. Thanks.
No problem. Thank you, Councillor. Okay, back to members of the committee then. I don't see any other members of council with cameras turned on. Are there other members of the committee wishing to ask questions?
I have a question, Mr. Mayor.
Where are you? Oh, there we are, Deputy Mayor. Yes, okay, please, go ahead.
It's of our CFO. My question, and she's muted right now. Oh, there she goes. We used to have better than a double. We have AA now, right? Is that right?
Through you,
AA?
Mr. Mayor, that's correct.
We used to be better. I seem to recall. We used to have a higher rating, didn't we?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, Councillor, Deputy Mayor, I'll happy to get the history on that. Unfortunately, I don't have that in front of me, so I just don't want to comment and and give you an incorrect answer.
Well, maybe as part of that briefing note, you can include, the last time we were downgraded and what the financial penalty was to the city for the downgrade. That would give us some context of actually, how reckless it would be to spend this extra money and actually cut off our nose to spite our face. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
I was waiting to see if that was a question and whether there was going to be an answer. But having said that, it's a statement. And anyway, we'll leave it at that. Okay. Other members of the committee, Councillor Deputy Mayor Thompson. Questions of staff.
Thank you very much, Mr. Mayor, and good morning, everyone. I guess through to the city manager and Ms. Taylor, I'm going to ask a sort of an omnibus question. The city manager referred in his remarks that he mentioned it's a COVID budget. We have things like the TTC, the health cost. I suspect that there are other things as well, but specifically what I'd like to know, we have, for example, fleet services that we buy vehicles and what have you. In looking at the pressures that you're facing, and this is an ongoing issue, and certainly to the questions that were being asked about our debt ceiling and so on, in terms of the recognition that whether or not we could move that and what the impacts would be. What I'd like to know is, in your modeling and looking at, obviously future year and multi-year budgeting and so on, have you taken into consideration, for example, allowing the province to take on the TTC responsibility? We asked them for funding to help us to manage that, but if this was something that was off our books, I mean, that would give us significant amount of cash. I know that the amounts of money, which is, I believe, is a $650 million around, the number may be a little bit higher, but about what's being used for helping the health department with respect to the pandemic and dealing with those issues. So I guess my question in essence then, I mean, have you been looking at sort of options and ways to look at what we possibly could do in terms of shifting the burden on the city and really putting where it needs to be, in this case, the province, in terms of transportation and the TTC as such?
Let me start, and Heather, you
Sure.
you can certainly fill in. I think, Deputy Mayor, you're hitting upon what is, one of the largest challenges that we faced certainly last year and this year, is the operating costs of TTC. And I mean, notwithstanding the fantastic news that we heard from the government of Canada regarding massive capital investments in transit, and the details of which we will know better in the coming days, the ongoing challenge that we have this year, and it's going to continue next year and beyond, is the operating challenge. And, all other matters that we're dealing with, and you have to include in that the in excess of $200 million that we're paying for shelter costs. At some point, those social distancing issues will be addressed, but, the work from home movement that you're seeing right now is going to have a long-lasting effect. So it becomes one of those points that I think with the province and or the federal government is to really raise with them what is their appetite for looking at offsetting some of our operating costs as it relates to transit. So I mean that's part of the conversation that is happening with the GTHA member municipalities. I mean, it's about service and fare integration, but also the sustainability of operating our transit system. So I think you're raising an incredibly important point. We don't have an answer to it yet, but it is certainly one of the big options that would be worth exploring with the upper levels of government.
So just on some of the things that I think we can address, fleet service costs, for example, on an annualized basis, we're spending a significant amount of money on our fleet services. I'm just wondering, have we looked to see whether or not there are options for us to be able to work with outside agencies to look at reducing our costs, and that would create a much, I guess, a cheaper way of affording the fleet services?
Through the mayor, Lloyd, if you're on the call, you may want to address.
Through you, Mr. Mayor, we absolutely have. In fact, Councillor, we are the only municipality in Canada with manufacturer direct arrangements for vehicle procurement. So the majority of our assets, we've through a multi-year strategic plan, we've worked directly with manufacturers. They still come through the dealers located in the city, so we get the best possible pricing for assets.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor Thompson. Other questions of staff from members of the committee? Well, I have one in the meantime, while others might think about this. Could I ask a question of the Chief Financial Officer? If we were to have come along an operating expenditure, say in the tens of millions of dollars, how would, in light of the fact we balance the budget as it is with a gap remaining for which we're seeking assistance, and it's for the assistance I think we would receive, it's fair to say, because I've been, of course, very involved in this, is going to be confined to a number of different areas as opposed to just a pot of money that we can do anything we want with. If there was some other operating expenditure that found its way to the budget, how would we fund that at this stage of the game, or what would we do?
Mr. Mayor, we would have to look for an offset. As you know, the budget that you have before you is a balanced budget. So in order to incorporate or accommodate an additional expense, we would have to look for a revenue source, or we would have to reduce an existing expense that's currently in the budget.
And maybe you could just comment. I heard you make reference, and thank you for that answer. I heard you make reference to the. Sorry, I'm just going to reset the clock here to be fair to everybody else. There we go. I already took a minute of it, so I'll take 4 more if I need it. You made reference earlier on to the status of the reserves, and perhaps you could just go through the math again, because I know there are people who just would, run those reserves down to 0 if they had the chance. But maybe you could talk about sort of where they start and what you anticipate some funds may be needed to do, or to backstop or to protect against, and then where that would leave us, because I remember you mentioned this 1.26% number. Could you just take us through that so that the public and people watching understand where we are with that?
Yes, I'm happy to. So it is a little bit of math. So we started off at the beginning of the year with about 113 million in our reserves, and that was just over the 2% threshold that I had mentioned. During the year, during 2020, we actually deviated from a normal council policy and contributed the 2019 surpluses. Rather than putting them into the capital financing reserve, they were in actual fact put in intentionally into the tax stabilization reserve as a COVID backstop because of the uncertainties that we were experiencing in 2020. In addition to that, as you know, back in July, when we did our very first COVID report, we indicated that we were slowing down our capital spend to address the fact that there was COVID uncertainty. So we had underspending from a provincial gas tax perspective, as well as a capital plan perspective. We put those funds that would have otherwise been spent on capital into the tax stabilization reserve, when it was about 593 million. When we look at our balance of the tax stabilization reserve, we are really looking at that bucket as being a COVID backstop. So as I mentioned, the COVID backstop that we need for 2021 requires 324 million because it's half of the overall gap. So we are taking the difference of the 593 and the 324, and we're saying that it's about 270 million. That's going to stay in our COVID backstop reserve. When you look at our tax stabilization reserve, we had the 113 million, and we have approximately 20 million that we've added onto that. So we're at 133 million. as just a normal tax stabilization amount. The other components that I mentioned, in order to keep our budget balanced, we actually have to also consider that we've asked for refugee funding from the federal government for 61 million, and we've asked for funding from the province of Ontario for supportive housing of 15 million. Those two amounts aren't coming out of our COVID backstop, they're above and beyond, so they would be a reduction against the 133 stabilization amount.
So I'll come back.
That takes us below the 2% goal that we have.
I'm not sure even I think I do follow all that because I've been through it before, but can I just ask you a question before going back to that math for 1 minute? In looking at our credit rating and our overall financial management, do the rating agencies and the banks look at our reserves as part of what they look at overall with respect to our state of creditworthiness and our financial health?
They absolutely do. What they do is they look for the city's ability to weather what they call shocks. And, you know, obviously the pandemic is far more of a shock. It's more like an earthquake. But the fact is they look to see whether or not there are adequate resources to weather the storm. And as you know, the credit rating agencies this year have kept our credit rating at AA, and they have commented on the fiscal management and the prudent decisions that have been made to weather this storm of COVID.
All right, and that would lead to my final question, and that is this. If we got the money, which I'm working hard to make sure we do, and so are our city staff with their counterparts in the other governments, if we got that money to help us with the COVID, I'll call it the COVID shortfall, would it be the case that in order to avoid cutting capital, because otherwise a lot of that money that you put away into that reserve fund would have gone to capital under council policy, would it be right then if we spent it on something else, especially on operating expenditures, that would be denying us money that otherwise could be available for capital in the event we get the support we need from the other governments? Is that correct?
Mr. Mayor, that is absolutely correct, because that money should have been spent on capital. So it is not our preference, it is not our recommendation to spend any of that what we're deeming as COVID backstop on anything other than either backstop or direct it to the capital program.
Thank you. Okay, let me just check and see now if we get the screen back with all the councillors on it, the members of the committee. Bad shot of my bad haircut. Okay, there we are. Okay, other questions of staff from members of the committee or visiting councillors? There's Councillor McKelvey. Go ahead, please.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I don't know. I had my hand up earlier. I don't know if you saw me. My question is for energy and environment. And, you know, I think we're all keen to see the net zero report. Can you just let us know why Q4 is the timeline you think is most appropriate to report back on this?
Thank you, Councillor, and through the Mayor. Yeah, there's a significant amount of research that we need to do on that still. We're contracting out a lot of that work as we speak to our consulting partners. But in addition to that, one of the great successes of the division has been our ongoing consultation, which we do on most things that we deliver. So we will be talking with community groups. We'll be talking to our Indigenous partners. We have a very great relationship with them. So that all takes time, of course. So that's where we are. Okay.
And we did ask for a preview of a report back in Q3 to help us in anticipation of the 2022 budget. Can you tell us what we can expect in Q3 from you now?
Right. So in Q3, we will be bringing forward an update on where we stand with what we've called acceleration projects. And acceleration is really the key word. A lot of these initiatives are already underway. So, for example, we are at the very end of a process which took a lot of coordination to pull together with a developer called Noventa, the Toronto Water, and the Toronto Western Hospital. That project is coming to the end. We should be signing that agreement in the next week or so. This is a project where we're using heat contained in the city sewer system to heat the hospital. the result will be a reduction of about 90% of their carbon footprint. So that's the first one. We've got the second one lined up at Etobicoke General Hospital, and we've just launched a study to look for other opportunities across the city to take that one project that we're finishing now and replicate it another 15 or 20 times, which is really what they hope, right? So there's that one. We've got the home energy loan program, which is well underway. We've got the mayor's Green Will program, which we've started, and we want to do a lot more. So again, we want to take what we're already doing and replicate it a lot of times.
So those are projects you think you could accelerate should additional funds open up either through the city or through the federal government through their new net zero announcement?
Correct. I mean, we've already made an application to the federal government through their Green Municipal Fund to help support our home energy loan program, and we're hoping that we are successful there. We think we've got a really good chance, but anytime we have an opportunity to pursue external financing, we will. And of course, with when the private sector's involved, they bring their own financing to some of these projects too.
So your budget has a reduction over last year. And that's been explained to me previously of being part of it is reflecting that Transform TO is now shifting across the whole organization. So actually, I think this next question is really for the CFO. And maybe could the CFO speak to how we're starting to look at the projects across the city that are contributing to both Transform TO and to resilience?
Mr. Mayor, Councillor, we are looking to apply a climate lens in how we procure goods as well as our capital programs. So this is something that is currently being worked on, and it is our intention to have a climate lens, a social lens on our procurement by the end of 2021 on a consistent basis, and looking at our capital projects where there's opportunities to highlight or incorporate capital components or offset components as part of our decision making.
Okay, and then financially now you've collated it. So in budget note 44, it talks about, so this year's investments that contribute to both capital investments that contribute to both that Transform TO and the resilience strategy total 611 million. And then over the 10-year plan, 4.8 billion. So could you just speak to how you're generating this number? And this is kind of the first time you've done it.
Through you, Mr. Mayor, Councillor, I'm going to ask Steve Conforti to speak to the capital plan components.
Hi, through you, Mr. Mayor. So we were working in terms of how we collect information within our capital planning system. And what we've done is we've added elements to that, ensuring that if a project had a component that addressed climate change or reduced GHGs, that it would be indicated. And we were able to ensure that we were essentially tagging all of those projects to be able to come up with a list. We've also developed some training and information as part of budget development, which is part of what we need to continue to work on next year as we refine it further. I know that we have Linda online as well, who may want to add to that.
I think that's great. I'm out of time. I just want to then confirm. So we're working towards embedding a climate lens and a resilience lens into decision making and into the financial accounting. Is that kind of sum up where we're going with this?
Mr. Mayor, absolutely. That is the commitment.
Final question.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, and I'm quite happy, by the way, while I want to make sure everybody gets a turn, given the relatively small number of people and the size of the budget, and that we'll have other rounds if Councillor McKelver or anybody else would like to ask more questions. We had then, back to you, Councillor Layton, are you wanting to ask some more questions?
Yes, please. Thank you very much. I think my questions are going to be of environment and energy, and then over to shelter, support, and housing, and then finally, if time, paramedics. Just first to, and this may actually go to the CFO. It just builds on Councillor McKelvey's questions. The climate lens is currently being used for capital projects, but the plan is to expand it to operating.
Through you, Mr. Mayor. Councillor, when I mentioned the procurement piece, as you know, the city procures a vast amount of products. We are looking at incorporating a climate lens into our procurement decisions. So that will potentially impact services that we purchase, but it'll definitely impact the goods that we procure.
Well, will that same lens expand to also take a look at other city operations beyond capital projects and procurement?
Through you, Mr. Mayor. Councillor, could you elaborate what you mean by outside of procurement?
When we look at how we spend our transportation dollars and how our transportation department does their work. I think the direction from council was that all operations and investments that the city makes be looked through a climate lens. I wrote it, so I can go back and check, but I'm pretty sure that's what the motion called for.
Through you, Mr. Mayor, I was just asking for clarification. I'll ask Barbara Gray to speak specifically to transportation. I was just expanding on the procurement aspect of how the city is approaching the purchasing of goods and services, but Barbara Gray might be able to elaborate a little bit more on the transportation aspect if you're interested.
Well, I'm just curious because we asked to develop a framework, a climate lens that could be used to evaluate the city's the city's activities in relation to our impact on the climate. And I'm just curious if that's going to be just on new capital investment and purchasing, that seems rather limited compared to what the intent was.
So through you, Mr. Mayor, I apologize if I've made it seem like it's limited. Yes, overall, and I think Jim would be able to elaborate, but we are absolutely looking at every opportunity to ensure that climate considerations are given.
Yeah, if I can just add to that and through the mayor, Councillor, you're absolutely right. The intent of the application of the climate lens is that it will be applied to all projects, capital and operating, new buildings, state of good repair, retrofits. So our intent is to capture the climate impact of every investment decision that we make, whether it's capital or operating, whether it's climate action or resilience or both.
Okay. Could I ask one question about the list that was provided? It's very helpful. I just want to make one distinction. If a project is in the list, is their overall capital investment listed, or the portion as it relates to resilience or climate mitigation? Because there's a pretty big distinction there. If we're building a parking lot and putting $1 million and putting 20 million in, but only $1 million's going to stormwater management, what number's in? The 20 or the 1?
Yeah, thank you, Councillor, and through the mayor. The investment dollars that are represented in that table are the total investment dollars. So basically, it would be the entire parking lot and not just the storm management system. That's one of the fixes that we need to build into it as we modify and improve the lens itself.
Maybe you can help me understand. Does the gardener get in there somehow? Like if someone's tacking a solar panel on the side and all of a sudden claiming that $1 billion, just kidding. On to a shelter support and housing. There's a footnote. And I just want to ask about this footnote. We had a long discussion about this at Budget Committee. I don't expect you'll have a long discussion about it here today. But there's a footnote in Table 1 on page 3 that says the 2021 staff recommended budget for SSHA includes funding for $14 million to provide funding for 510 units scheduled to open in Q1 and 150 slated to open in Q2. This amount is prorated for 2021. Can you explain to me how the staff recommended budget was included in here, included this money, but at the same time, the money doesn't exist?
Final question on this go round. Thank you.
Thank you for the question to the chair. I would have to ask the CFO to assist me in answering that question. I know that we wanted to identify the pressures in the system and the solutions that were available to us. But it is all contingent on backstop and having partnerships with other levels of government. I don't know if Heather would like to add anything to that, but that's the way we presented the budget.
Councillor, if you want additional information, I don't know if that helped.
I'm just wondering if when presented by staff, was it a funded, recommended to be funded, or was it always recommended to be unfunded, contingent on another level of government?
It was always contingent on another level of government. Operation of supportive housing has always been the responsibility of the provincial government. We've been working really hard to identify the units, and we are actively seeking the collaboration of the provincial government to partner with us on that.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thanks, Councillor Layton. Councillor Pasternak.
Great, thank you very much, Mr. Mayor. Through you to staff, my questions are related to Parks, Forestry, and Recreation. If they want to unmute their mics. So I'm looking at the settlement regarding the Bombardier lands adopted by council last week or on January the 26th. And I'm just wondering to what degree, there's a reference to a community center, to what degree was recreation or Parks, Forestry, and Recreation involved in these negotiations? There's clearly some paragraphs here that refer to the Downsview Community Center.
So through you, Mr. Mayor, to Councillor Pasternak, and I'm going to ask Anne-Marie Nazar to probably add to my answer. But as you know, we have been actively involved both with planning and with the Development Corporation around the planning for a community center in the Downsview secondary plan, as noted at council last week. So we're moving along with their help and with the timing to coincide with when some of those funds become available through that development process. And I'd ask Anne-Marie to add if she needs to.
Can people hear me? Sorry.
Yes, no, it's good.
Okay. Yes, so we've been seamlessly working with city planning on this because ultimately we want to ensure that the future redevelopment of Downsview will be a complete community with parks and a variety of recreation and other community infrastructure. At the same time, Councillor, you've identified the interest in looking at the William Baker area and the community center around that. So we've been working with you and with the North Crest developer and CLC around that. And a motion was approved at council last week that basically addressed how we can have those discussions and consider a future funding that would be released from either the federal or provincial government.
All right, so I'll circle back to, I guess it's page 40 of the analyst notes for recreation, where the Downsview Community Center is on there for the first time. It's great. Thank you very much for getting that on the capital plan. It was a motion we moved. But the design work is many years down the road, and it doesn't seem to harmonize with what was adopted by council. Without design work, we cannot build affordable housing. In fact, no building permits can be issued on this site without design work yet. I'm not sure. I mean, I don't even buy green bananas anymore. This is years and years down the road. Is there any opportunity to revisit this number and accelerate it a little better so we can build the affordable housing and get the parkland going in the area?
So I'll just, through you, Mr. Mayor, I think the way the motion was worded at council last week gives us a number of options around advancing this project. And very specifically, it speaks to if federal or provincial funding becomes available to be able to advance it into earlier years. I think there is a process in place. There's a lot of work going on, and we need to continue that work to confirm when those funds may be available to advance the community center. In terms of the settlement, I'd ask Greg to comment on the obligations through the settlement around the design of a community center. Sorry, thanks, Greg.
Yeah, I'll just supplement Janie's comments that, as you know, Councillor, we're going to the LPAT next with a settlement that was adopted by Council. And then we will be commencing the secondary plan. There will be many reports on the secondary plan, of course. And I think you can anticipate that we will be able to report back on the status of this motion in the context of those secondary plan reports and the discussions that will be ongoing with Northcrest.
Would you concur to the view that we're not eligible for federal money unless it's shovel ready with design work?
I think that's a question for Janie.
Right. I mean, there are different kinds of, funding requirements for various pots of funding. So it's not clear yet where this may fit in either existing or in future funding availability from both the provincial and federal government. Some of the funding opportunities are very short term, looking at projects that are imminent and may already be in the design process. Others are longer term, looking at multi-year programs. So, at this point, it's too early to tell around whether it will be available. I know that it certainly has been endorsed by Council as a priority to be submitted as part of those funding requests when the programs are announced, so that it will be on that list.
There is a chance to get design money from a federal infrastructure tranche.
Final question on this 5-minute tranche.
Through you, Mr. Mayor, I'm going to ask Anne-Marie. She's been working quite intimately on this project.
So every single federal program has its own character and has its own criteria. So we would basically be looking at what would be available for Downsview and advancing, as Janie mentioned, a request for Downsview, particularly given the fact that, with the developer being very pro-green and around net zero and other matters, I think I'm very hopeful that we would be in a good position around that potential source of grant.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you, Councillor. Other questions of staff from members of the committee? Deputy Mayor Bylaw.
Thank you, Chair. To the city manager, in your presentation, you talked about tower retrofits. I just want to ensure that you're referring to the tower renewal program. Are we increasing funding on that program through this budget?
Through the mayor, short answer is yes. That's what we were referring to, and yes, we're going to continue to invest.
Okay. Is there an increase on the amount of retrofits that we are aiming to do?
I'd have to get the specifics from staff in terms of just the amount and what the nature of that amount is allocated for. So if there's someone that can identify that would be helpful. And otherwise, I'll make sure that we get that information to you.
Okay, thank you. With regards to the supportive housing, and I want to follow up on that question from Councillor Layton. So the $15 million is what would be required for supports for the 1,000 units that we actually are going to be bringing on board throughout the year, right? So through the rapid rehousing, new units, acquisitions, modular, we know that we can deliver about 1,000 units next year, and we need $15 million coming from the provincial government. Is that correct?
So
go ahead, Marianne.
Sorry, I was going to say our plan that we shared with Council identifies 1,200 units, of which we have funding for about 150. The 15.4 million is a prorated amount. We would need about 26 million annually.
Yes, but for this year, as they're coming on board, so that's why our ask is 15 and then 26 in the future.
Yes.
Okay. To the housing secretariat. So we've been adding, more housing now sites, more modular sites. In your budget request, are you adding the resources needed to deploy these projects as soon as possible in terms of, staffing, planning, consultants to make sure we can proceed with these as soon as possible?
Yes, we have increased the amount of investment on the city side in 2021 to enable us to deliver and move ahead on the Housing Now sites that we have coming online. So in order to move forward on the additional kind of almost 14 sites that we have committed, we've included that in our budget, and also that also includes funding for planning and legal staff, as well as Housing Secretariat and Creatio staff as well.
Okay, great. To MLS, does your staff complement include the staffing required for the rents safe and the short-term rental inspectors required to fulfill the inspections on these programs and the success of these programs?
Deputy Mayor, thank you for the question. We have both the rent safe team and the short-term rental team do have dedicated officers for them. We are also in the midst of a competition to hire an additional 25 to 28 officers, and that would backfill any vacancies in those areas. But I can tell you on the short-term rentals piece, though, that originally when it was approved by council in 2017, I think we had 3 bylaw enforcement staff, and now that is up to 5. And I think we had 2 audit and compliance, and I think that is up to 4. So we have built it, and we will continue. It's going to be busy the first few months as it is right now, but we hope that it becomes sustainable and that we don't need to have a lot of dedicated resources there, as a lot of the work is going to be around data.
So are you in the process of hiring?
Yes, we will have. We are in the process of hiring. We had a job call out in the fall. We have received over 800 applicants. We've done screening, we've done testing, and now we're on to the next round of interviews, and then have them trained and up and ready, hopefully sometime in April.
Okay. And through the same thing through ECS. I know that we've all been battling with extreme staff shortages at ECS. How's your hiring and staff complement to the needs of the city? Is there anybody here that can answer that question?
Sorry, Councillor. Can you hear me now? Apologies.
Yeah.
Yeah. Through the mayor to the councillor. Yes, much the same at our end. We are forging ahead with our job calls. We have been challenged in the past, as you know, in terms of recruitment for our senior positions, but we are moving. And in addition to that, so far as the development review process, we have additional staff requested in our 2021 budget submission. So we have the 12 on the development review, and we have 2 for the affordable housing file as well. So we are moving as quickly as we can.
So this budget, so there's no hiring slowdown. There's actually full speed ahead, and you're getting extra staff during this budget.
Correct. We're moving as quickly as we can on the recruitment. Absolutely.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor. Other questions of the staff by members of the committee or otherwise? Deputy Mayor Thompson.
Thank you very much, Mr. Mayor. Through you to staff, the impact of this budget on many of the challenges that we've seen in the year past, such as the homelessness issue and the encampment and so on, and equity issues. I wanted to ask, how will this budget address those specific impact, given the fact that last year we obviously worked really hard to deal with these issues and the demand continues to increase? What will we see that will be different in terms of how we address these issues?
So if I can, I think Julie, if you don't mind, that's a question I think is best directed to you.
Sorry. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can. Thank you, Julie.
Yep.
So, sorry, Deputy Mayor, can you just repeat that question? You want to know how our investments are going to help deal with the impacts that COVID is having on our more vulnerable population, including the homeless?
Yeah.
So we have, as you know, we've been working very closely, all of our divisions across community and social services, with our community partners to understand what's happening on the ground and to ensure that we coordinate with our community agencies, ensuring that they have the support. We provide our own programs, but we also leverage the programs and the services that are out there in the community, in the neighborhoods, and those agencies are people and agencies that the people in those neighborhoods, they trust and they have confidence in them because they see them every day. We've also invested additional funds in some, if you look at our budget, there's been many increases for long-term care, for shelter support and housing, in order to ensure that we can provide services in a COVID-safe way to protect residents, staff, and our communities.
Thank you. I guess this message is for the city manager. Mr. City Manager, I think I've had at least 4 or 5 calls in the last few days indicating that we need to be increasing the tax amount that we're charging. The amount is, the rate is 2.2%, consists of the 0.7 increase and the 1.5%. Just wondering, what would you say to those individuals, recognizing that as we approach 2022, we're going to see immense pressure as well?
Through the mayor, I think, first of all, we did last summer survey a number of people on this very point, and the recommendation was not in 2021 start to raise property tax to the amounts that maybe some people are considering. So again, for a 1% increase in our property tax is worth in around about $30 million. So we're not recommending that because I think we're taking some advice from the general public that weighed in on this through the survey work that was done last summer. And B, if you look at our increase, and we could certainly provide information as to how it compares with others, there are some that are going with 0. And I think, to your point about the 1.5% property tax that's being earmarked for housing and transit, I would not take my foot off the gas in terms of those critical investments, because as well as I do, that we have in excess of $30 billion challenge when it over the next 15 years when it comes to the maintenance and upkeep of our transit system. So now is not the time for us to take our foot off the gas on that, nor our housing challenge. So that 1.5 is critical.
Thank you very much. I have 2 further questions, and I'll just ask them both. One's of planning, whether or not you have enough staff to actually address the concerns and the complaints that we've had from the planning industry and the development industry, that planning is not responding to their application in a timely manner. And then the other question I have is around police. I know that the police budget is similar to that of last year. Given the calls from different groups and organizations with respect to wanting to see a reduction in the police budget, would someone explain the actual reduction in terms of things that the police been able to identify in terms of efficiency, and also let us know whether or not what is the number of reduction in terms of police officers?
Through the mayor, very quickly, Deputy Mayor Thompson, on your planning question. Staff, we are in the process of hiring, got a significant number of job calls out on a number of levels to hire up. That's the same story that you heard from Michael D'Andrea and ECS and Transportation and others that all support the planning process. We're also underway with our C2K program, which is a process improvement initiative. So together with hiring and the process improvement initiative, we do expect to continue to meet the needs of the development industry.
And I know the time has passed, but there was a second part to that question which would be properly answered. Now, I haven't forgotten, Councillor Deputy Mayor Thompson, what it was. It was to do with, the police budget. Is there somebody who can speak to that from the police?
Thanks.
From the police? Just on the line?
Mr. Mayor, it's Tony Veneziano, the CAO.
Thank you. Go Go ahead. Did you hear the question?
If Councillor Thompson could just repeat the question, I'd really appreciate it.
Thank you.
Yes, thank you. Good morning, Tony. I was simply asking, given the fact that the police budget is the same as last year, there have been numerous calls in terms of reducing budget. Wanted to understand what are the things that the police service has done with respect to looking at efficiency within the organization, as well as to ask around number of police officers that may have been, in terms of the numbers, have been reduced as a result of the change and or the efficiencies that have been found as a result of the budget that's being presented to us this time.
So what we've done is actually try to limit our increase, obviously, to zero by absorbing certain investments that we make in priority areas. And the examples that I'll give you would be the neighborhood officer program, where we're looking to expand that program to up to 10 additional neighborhoods. We do see a spike in hate crimes, so certainly we want to invest in that area as well as gang and gun prevention and intervention, so more of a proactive, all of which we're absorbing within our budget without asking for additional funds. We've had to reduce both our uniform and our civilian complement by 50 and 90 respectively in order to sort of balance our budget. But we've also done stuff in the past that really have contributed to our keeping our increase to as low as possible. We've actually reduced our overall complement by 400 positions since 2010. Which translates to a sustained savings of about $40 to $50 million a year. We've civilianized wherever we can. We've transferred core services like the school crossing guard and lifeguard programs to the city, where it's not really a core policing responsibility. So we've done what we can to actually, we've actually returned properties to the city that now are redundant to our operations, all of which to try to create efficiencies and come in with a fiscally responsible budget.
Thank you, Tony, and thank you, Deputy Mayor Thompson. Are there let me just take stock here of who has questions left from the committee so I can see, because we got to move to speakers at some point. Okay. I just had one more then, and that will then move to speeches, and so people can get ready to speak as they wish. And we'll start, of course, with I don't see anybody on the screen at the moment from outside council, although I did see Councillor Fletcher earlier say she wanted to make some comments, so we might just reach out to her, and then we have Councillor Layton there as well. So my question is this. I think some work was done, and it really follows along some of the questions we've been hearing this morning. Some work was done because both some of the other governments sometimes, but more often just our, I'm sure, well-meaning critics, suggest that we're not making enough of a contribution on the housing file. And I think it's in part because our contribution is not so much cash that we sort of stand up and announce on a given day and write a check, but rather it's through deferred fees and different kinds of things, land that we give up. Am I right? There was some work done, and if so, I just wanted to kind of get a handle on, I think the work produced a number that in fact represented our contribution to the housing efforts that we're undertaking as a city government, as distinct from what the others are doing, to complement what they're doing, and they complement what we're doing in turn. Am I right there was some work done maybe to the Chief Financial Officer to try and quantify that?
Mr. Mayor, you're correct. The budget launch had a slide in it where it indicated the amount of contributions that we were making on the housing file. I'm just trying to pull it up to give you the amount. I will get back to you in a couple of minutes.
Yeah, if you can sometime. I just think it's an important thing for people to understand that we're certainly making a very substantial and varied contributions, plural, to the housing programs that we advocate to the other governments for. And I think they understand that. A lot of these are things we've initiated, in fact, starting oftentimes with our own city land and then working through development charges, taxes, and other charges that we defer or waive as part of the incentive to get housing, especially affordable housing and supportive housing built. Okay, I think that was all that I had. So on that note then, turning first to members of the council, city council outside of the committee, Councillor Fletcher, is she around? Okay, well, we do see Councillor Layton. I presume you want to say a few words, Councillor? Okay, well, so we'll turn to you, and then maybe we could just even be in touch, somebody, Catherine through the clerk or somebody, just to ask Councillor Fletcher, because she'd said she wanted to speak and she may have drifted off not knowing we'd get to speeches at this point. So, Councillor Layton, over to you.
Yes, thank you very much, Mr. Mayor and Executive Committee. First, like many of you likely will, I'd like to extend my deepest appreciation to staff for their work on this budget. It was a particularly difficult budget year. I can appreciate that. It's difficult for the city. It's difficult for the other levels of government. And it's particularly difficult for those that are least fortunate in our city. Given the additional strain that they see themselves in at this point in time. I'd like to thank, as always, the budget chief, who I think does a good job in entertaining the rather significant requests that we put of him, and particularly that I put of him, and the position that he's put in. And I'm glad that that while we don't always agree, that we always can have a conversation, and that I'll always count him as a friend. Now, I'm going to give I gave a longer speech at Budget Committee. I'm going to give a longer speech at Council that may have a slightly different flavor, but this one is going to be my speech in praise and in hope that our mayor will be successful in negotiating with the other levels of government. $850 million that we've said we need to keep this government afloat through a crisis. We have found a way to backstop it. Perhaps that was ill-advised. Maybe we should have just gone ahead and said, we can't backstop it, governments give us this money, much like we're doing to the shelter, to the supportive housing budget. But we have said that number. We've found a way to backstop it, but it's not good. And I think we've done a good job throughout the budget process of demonstrating to the other levels of government that this will impact jobs in our city, because the investment that we put into capital will decrease. And it won't just decrease for 1 year. I know this is like this is a temporary backstop we're putting in, but that'll have a chain reaction and push projects out and limit the amount of investment we can actually make in future years. So if any members of those other levels of government are paying attention to the fundamental hole in the budget, we need your help this year. We also need your help in future years, because I hate to say I told you so, but year over year, those that it's been mentioned, the people that might ask to increase the capital spending or increase taxes, yeah, we have. I've been one of those people. But for the most part, it's always come with an additional revenue tool that year over year has been voted against. And that's because we eventually have found ourselves in this position that we're much too reliant on a handful of revenue sources that during a pandemic, things like transit funding, decreased dramatically. And it's put us at risk. Over time, it's been progressive, but it's put us at risk. I'm hopeful that the mayor will be successful, the council will be successful in our lobbying efforts at the other levels of government. But one place we can't fail. One place we can't fail is getting that supportive housing money. Because we heard from city staff just a couple weeks ago that we're switching gears away from emergency shelters and new investments in emergency shelters to go towards supportive housing. That's the right decision. Housing first. That's the right decision. I'm not faulting us for that. But if we fail to get the supportive housing elements, that strategy fails completely. Because we both won't have the shelter capacity and we won't have the supportive housing capacity. So if the provincial government doesn't come through, we're going to have to make a decision. Do we pursue the more humane, the more supportive approach, the more empathetic approach of providing those supportive housing units? Or do we just forget about those people that are sleeping in the park? Do we let them die? Because that's what the provincial government's doing right now. We don't have the necessary capacity coming online for our emergency shelters. We've put our eggs into providing supportive housing. It's the right decision to make. But if the other levels of government don't come through for us, and we don't have a way of backstopping that shortfall, then we may as well just forget about those people in the park, because that's how they're going to feel. Good luck, Mr. Mayor. You have all of our support behind you in pressing the provincial government.
Thank you, Councillor. I don't know if we didn't find Councillor Fletcher. We can always come back if she arrives. So let's go to members of the committee then who wish to speak, and we'll start with our budget chief, Councillor Crawford.
Thank you very much, Mr. Mayor. As I think everybody's been saying, this by far has been an unprecedented budget year, as well as a very challenging year for many in the city, and the impacts will be felt for years to come. I think, Mr. Mayor and Mr. City Manager, you recall some of those spring conversations we had, nervous spring conversations we had prior to any federal or provincial funding support coming forward to us, and they were very much concerning conversations. We're in a different space right now, but regardless. The financial impacts of 2020...
Councillor Crawford, sorry, I'm told you have a motion. I just want to make sure we...
yeah. You're right. I do apologize. I do have a motion that staff have asked me to move. It's to authorize the Executive Director of Corporate Real Estate Management and to approve the executive agreements to extend term of interest-free rental deferral agreements with the qualified tenants and licenses, and to authorize the control finance and treasury services in consultation with the Executive Director of Corporate Real Estate Management to forgive and write off any unrecoverable deferred rent following an unrecoverable debt analysis. And again, number 3 as well, I won't read that, it's before you, and this will be all reported back out into the first quarter. Thank you for reminding me, Mr. Mayor. The financial impacts of 2020 and 21 have been challenging and in many respects fundamentally changed many of those who have been tasked with managing this pandemic, as well as bringing forward a balanced budget. I want to thank all the staff, all across all the divisions and agencies for the dedication and commitment to this great city. Listen, there are a lot of heroes that we have seen come forward through this pandemic, but from my perspective, the true heroes of this budget are our city staff, and I want to thank them for the work that they've done. Mr. Mayor, I also want to thank you and your team for your leadership, and specifically, as has already been mentioned, you work in partnership with the other levels of government to secure the necessary funds to help bridge our financial gaps. Without that support and our support from the provincial federal governments, this would be a very different budget year and it'd be a very different city, and I want to thank them for that. It is very clear, of course, that we need to continue to forge stronger relationships as we need financial support for years to come. And of course, I do want to thank the members of the Budget Committee and those councillors who attended many of the meetings, along with the hundreds of residents all across the city who participate in the budget deputations. Mr. Mayor, before you and the Executive are the Budget Committee's recommendations for the 2021 operating and capital budgets. This budget is a responsive budget to COVID and is responsible in the face of the fiscal challenges that the city is facing. This budget does protect and preserve essential services. Yes, some work has been delayed in policy development and some reports to council. Many staff have been redeployed to other areas, but we have also sped up a lot of work, and we've heard some of that with the city manager's comments, like shelters, modular housing, cycling routes, online services, emergency childcare, and essential workers, just to name a few. This budget, of course, has also adjusted many services and created new services during the pandemic, and of course, due to public health measures, the budget is prepared to resume those services when permitted. But remarkably, there have been no service cuts, and to note, we are still investing to support the most vulnerable residents in this city. Mr. Mayor, now is not the time to be raising taxes. The TOR report found that most respondents citing financial hardship faced by families due to COVID-19 wanted the city to improve affordability and to keep taxes as low as possible. And this budget is doing that. At 0.07% for the rate of inflation, property tax increases average about $22 per person. And of course, with the city building levy at 1.5 or 45% per average household. Mr. Mayor, we have done, the city staff, we have all collectively done our part to be fiscally responsible with over 573 million efficiencies and cost-saving measures in this budget, as well as over 500 million done in 2020, and we can't forget about that. But as the Auditor General has pointed out recently, much more can be done, and we have to continue working hard at that. The budget does come with a bit of risk, as we have pointed out. We do have a $649 million backstop that could impact our capital if we do not receive support from other governments. But again, I'm comfortable and confident that based on the conversations you've been having and staff, that we will get that. We need to be prudent and we need to be responsible in our decisions this year. We cannot forget that 2022 has the same challenges that we have to look at and move forward. And again, that level of support from the governments has to be there. Mr. Mayor, I don't have to tell you that this has been a tough year, but I can say I'm proud of the 2021 operating budget and what it has achieved in light of its challenges. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Crawford, and thank you again for your work, and I'll have more to say about that when I have my own chance to speak. And we would go next to the Deputy Mayor Thompson.
Thank you very much, Mr. Mayor. I have a couple of motions. I wonder if staff could just put them up. But let me just do this one. Okay, here we go. Okay, this is the first motion. I'm moving actually this motion on behalf of Councillor Bradford. This is in his area, and essentially it is to ask the library to, the work that they're doing, it's to look at ensuring that the community hub work can actually continue at the same time. The next motion, please. The next motion should reflect to receive monies from the Future Skills for Social Development and Finance and so on. And I think it's, yeah, so it's pretty clear. It's money that we're receiving. So let me just also, Mr. Mayor, thank the city staff and also Heather Taylor and her leadership and Chris Murray and certainly the work that he and his team has done. Clearly, I want to thank the budget chief. He has continued to work really hard and very diligent. It's a lot of work that he and members of the budget committee have done. And Mr. Mayor, I want to thank you as well. And I know that's been stated that you're being wished good luck in your conversations with the province and the federal government. I think you've delivered quite well for the city so far, and you will continue to do that. And clearly, you have all of our support in terms of doing so. In my time here at City Council, I've never actually seen an easy budget. They seem to get harder and harder and harder and harder. With this pandemic, it has been extremely difficult, and it's also a hard and tough budget as well. I note in the questions I've asked the city manager around, this idea that people calling saying, you should increase the taxes. Our team have done, according and has been illustrated by the budget chief, an amazing job in being prudent in terms of managing the finances of the city. Yes, there are issues, and those are being addressed. We heard from the Auditor General in terms of some of the things that she's discussed just in the last few days. Those gaps exist, and we will continue to work at these. There are definitely needs in our communities, and this budget is attempting to address those. And as we've heard from the budget chief again, it says, we're not looking at cutting services, and that's really important. We're obviously focusing our attention in terms of helping those who are in need and ensuring that we can continue to grow the economic opportunities and the service in the city that ensures that residents will have the things that they need through this very difficult times. I think that based on the fact that we're able to help to backstop some of our own needs, in spite of the comments from Councillor Layton in terms of, why don't we get the other government to spend the money and, keep ours, we are able to demonstrate to them that we certainly are very prudent in terms of what we're doing and how we're managing our resources. But at the same time, that we cannot do this alone. We need their help and assistance. We know, for example, that, we can't burden the residential homeowners with more taxes, given the fact that many are challenged now and with not only mental health stress issues and so on, dealing with kids being at home, but also the fact that some have lost jobs, and it is hugely problematic for them. And so as we move into 2022, we know that it's going to be tough, and so at least tougher than it is now. And so we need to be prudent. We need to be very mindful. This is, as it's been said, it's a pandemic budget, and we know that there are many pressures that continues to face the city, and clearly as a region, we are impacted. And so I know that the city manager has spoken about the collaboration that's taking place within the region, because when we collaborate, I think that we can all benefit with respect to working with the other levels of government. And it is not just viewed as a Toronto-centric ask, but it is an overall regional ask, because we really need to work together as a region. So the question I ask about the planning department with respect to ensuring that the application processes can move quickly, I think it's extremely important, because we want to make sure that when applications come in, we can create get them out, and so that the jobs can be created. And so I thank everyone involved with respect to this process. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thanks, Deputy Mayor Thompson. Are there others wishing to speak? Councillor McKelvey.
Mr. Mayor, I have a motion. While it's being pulled up, I'll speak to it. The motion is recognizing that the Mena Reserve Restoration Project lands have now transferred to the Rouge Park, which is a big deal out here and good news, but it also recognizes that in 2019, City Council approved an allocation of $450,000 associated with this project to the Toronto Wildlife Centre to repair the barn and the house that are on site there for use in their facilities. So this motion just ensures that we meet that commitment that we made to them in 2019. I also want to echo the thanks that have been given to Councillor Crawford. I have had the opportunity to work alongside him on the Budget Committee now for 3 years, and he just does an absolutely phenomenal job with a very, very difficult task. So a big thank you to him. And as well recognize our CFO and the hard work of her and her department that have now decreased that gap in funding that we have to $649 million through their very, very hard work. And I know that we're all very fortunate to have Mayor Tory advocating on behalf of the City of Toronto to other levels of government for that much needed funding. And a final note of thanks I want to make is to Stephen Conforti, who has participated in numerous town halls and given the presentation on the city's budget. And I'm sure that despite giving that same presentation many, many, many times, he always delivers it with enthusiasm and the energy needed to answer all the questions from the community. So a big thank you to all of them. This year, I think, is exciting in terms of what we're doing at the city. We're starting to change the way we do business and the way we think about climate and resilience work. So instead of siloing those decisions into one department, we're starting to embed it into the culture so that everybody is thinking about how their work applies to climate change and to resilience. And if you look at the total dollars that we're spending in this way, we are spending $611 million this year on projects that contribute to climate change, greenhouse gas reductions, and resilience. And there's $4.8 billion that are in the 10-year capital program on this as well. And what's most important, though, is that we're also taking the steps to build back better, to seize opportunities that are going to come from the provincial and the federal governments in this regards. We've seen them make transit announcement just yesterday. We have heard their commitment in the throne speech to have a new deal with municipalities to enhance green spaces. And we've also seen their net zero announcement. So it's very likely that there will be economic stimulus in these three areas. And the city is working very hard to get those projects in shovel-ready conditions so that we're ready to seize those opportunities. So this is a hard budget year, and it's always hard to find the silver lining, but I think it's there, and it's very much includes some of our projects on climate change and resilience. So thank you.
Thanks, Councillor McKelvey. I just got a note indicating that the Chief Financial Officer I had asked a question earlier, and she had an answer with respect to the amount of money that was contained in some briefing note or other that talked about the amount the city's put into the various housing initiatives that we've undertaken. Do you just want to share that answer with us, just so that we can have it on the record?
Yes, Mr. Mayor. Sorry I didn't have it handy when you asked the question. In the budget launch deck, it was on slide 34. But we indicated that the city's investment was $2.9 billion in housing initiatives, and there was an additional $4.4 billion in foregone revenues in the 10-year capital plan. So it's a total of 7.3 billion.
Thanks very much. Okay, back to the speakers. Can we have an indication of those who wish to speak? I'm just looking for hands here. I've got Councillor Pasternak next. Please go ahead. And I think you have a motion.
Yes, I do have a motion. If it's ready, I'd be prepared to speak now. If they need a few more minutes, I'll hold it down and let Councillor Ainsley go ahead.
I was just handed it, so
ready.
I think if they put it up, it's ready. I think it is. So up it shall go. There we are.
Great, thanks very much. So this motion is really a clarity motion to identify the critical path for the Downsview Community Centre. And I know many of my colleagues are thinking, well, I want a community centre in my ward, and many areas of the city need a community centre. I would just point out that this was originally adopted by council 10 years ago. And the way it sits on the capital plan is we have to wait another 10 years. And we can't do anything on the Downsview lands and the vacant lands up by Barjay, either adding green space to our national park or building affordable housing or mid-market housing. The way the settlement is done, adopted by council last week, is we can't issue any permits without design, shovel-ready community center to go. So I appreciate the work that's Recreation or Parks, Forestry and Recreation have invested in this, but at the same time, we don't have a clear path. So this is asking them to develop a more of a clear path. Like my colleagues, I just want to thank Councillor Crawford, Mayor Tory, of course, Heather Taylor, Chris Murray, for their work on this budget. And it is really hard to believe that despite the grave difficulty that we've had over the past year, that we could put together a document like this that preserves much of our key programming, that launches new initiatives, that keeps our city healthy and safe, that deals with many of our marginalized communities. The only sour note I've heard today, I have high regard for Councillor Layton, but I was shocked when he made it seem like there was another level of government that didn't care about the death of homeless people. It's a national responsibility by all levels of government, and to say it in that way, and I hope he retracts his comments maybe at council, is really out of line. And we're looking for federalism that works, and we're not looking to snipe at the other levels of government. We're looking to work together to get things done. And we all know that historically the national housing strategy was federal responsibility, which was dumped onto municipalities, provinces, and then municipalities over the decades. But that being said, I see many of the key elements of a livable, safe city, housing, harm reduction, food security, crisis response, community centers, youth hubs, nutrition programs. I mean, these are the elements that make for a safe, livable city. And although some of those motions have been passed already regarding infrastructure, we could see that we're investing in infrastructure, not doing everything we want, because at this time we can't. But certainly looking at making sure that our basement flooding program is addressed, that our roads are safe, that people can go from A to B in a safe way, that business can recover from the pandemic, and that we can all support that. On the Downsview side of things, naturally, with 500 acres to work with and numerous parties involved, it creates a daunting task at the local level, but it also creates a great opportunity for the good people of Downsview and the people of Toronto. We will be expanding parkland, building recreational assets, pathways, bike lanes, and of course, investing in the various green spaces that connect all aspects of Downsview. So I see that it has finally made it onto the capital plan, further down the road than I would have liked, but I think it's a very exciting opportunity. We're going to be working with staff over the years to build the assets, recreational assets and housing assets, and and green space that makes for a livable community. So once again, one may not believe in miracles, but this is the miracle budget. And I think it keeps the city safe, it keeps it livable, and it lives up to the expectations of the various communities across the city. So I want to thank once again the people involved. I was on Budget Committee. It was a great opportunity. Budget Committee works very hard, and I look forward to furthering the discussion at Council. Thank you very much, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Pasternak. So we'll go back to the full slate of people and have a look at the grid and see who would like to speak next. Councillor Ainsley.
Thank you, Mayor Tory. I do have a motion that I would like to move. That City Council allocate $850,000 to the erosion risk management restoration infrastructure project at 26, 28, and 30 Livingston Road, which is dealing with the Scarborough Bluffs Crest erosion project for its completion, planning, and design and remedial work to reduce erosion by managing stormwater and reducing load from the crest. The full motion's on the screen. This is a project that's actually on the top of the Scarborough Bluffs, where a number of residents in the immediate community have concerns about the impact of erosion on the Scarborough Bluffs, both on their own property currently and how it could impact properties to the north and the south of them if the erosion continues to be allowed to continue. Saying that, I'd ask for my colleagues' support on this. Speaking to the budget as a whole, I want to begin by thanking our Budget Chief, Councillor Crawford, all the members of the Budget Committee for all of their hard work and diligence. I want to thank all of the finance staff, our City Manager, Chris Murray, Heather Taylor and her team for all of their hard work and dedication. When COVID started last March and we were receiving daily and weekly updates on the financial impact of COVID, it became quite clear we didn't have a balanced budget last year or this year, 2020. They worked very hard to fill the holes, working with other levels of government. Mayor Tory, can't thank you for enough of all of your leadership, both last year and this year as we worked with the federal and provincial government, because we're legislated to balance our budget. And we have a number of services that we can't carry on the back of the property taxes, TTC, public health. There's a number of areas where we really need the federal and provincial government to jump in to help our balanced budget, to make sure that we can get the residents of the City of Toronto through COVID, to try and maintain the services that they need and expect from their municipal government. And I think, we've done a lot of work to make sure that we've achieved that goal, but it's been a team effort by a lot of different people to get us there. And once again, I want to thank everybody for their hard work and dedication. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Councillor Ainsley. Any questions of the mover? Okay, let me just get the slate back up here. Is that to speak, Deputy Mayor Barlow? Is that to speak?
Yes, Mayor. Thank you.
Yes, please go ahead. Thank you.
Thank you. I too want to join my voice to express my gratitude to staff, to our Budget Chief, and to yourself, Mayor. I think that, as it was said over and over again, this was a very difficult budget year. I mean, it started last year with COVID and the pressures that we faced on our budget, and I think everybody has done an incredible job, not only to reinforce our reputation of good financial and responsible financial stewardship, to ensure that we maintain our credit rating and that we address the issues that we had last year by advocating to other orders of government as well to ensure that we keep those fundings, and to put this budget forward. And I'll talk a little bit more in just a second about still the pressures that we have. But I think that where we started on a right note, and I appreciate your direction and the one that our Budget Chief put on this budget, is that we definitely wanted a budget that was going to maintain our city services. We know that more than ever, many of these frontline city services are crucial even to respond to the pandemic that we're living. And so I think that as a guiding principle for this budget was essential. And then the other one, that this is no time for cuts, and actually that was time actually to invest in certain programs. And that's what this budget delivers here. We invested on equity. We invested on programs in our neighborhoods. We invest on an equitable response on COVID as well, with many programs that have been rolled out over the last few months. We are investing on our community crisis response unit, which we heard from Torontonians. It is a priority. And in programs across the city to target youth, and I know that there's going to be even some motions moved here today, which once again are intended to support many in our city, and in particularly hard-hit areas and hard-hit communities. I also want to emphasize the work that is being put forward throughout this year and last year on housing. We approved just before the pandemic in December 2019 a housing plan. And you saw the numbers that we've committed as a city. And let me tell you that in the pandemic, we have been accelerating this plan. Yes, the federal government has come to the table with the rapid rehousing, and that allowed us to accelerate it even more. But just to give you an idea on the current projects that we have right now under project or under construction, we, the city, have invested $1.35 billion, and the federal and provincial government invested $315 million. So the city is definitely all in on ensuring that we move forward on our housing plan. With regards to the three pressures that we have in the budget, the $650 million, I think it is clear that, especially if we need to backtrack on some of the capital investments that we have in our plan, that this is not the way to go. And I am confident that once again, the provincial and the federal government understand that this is, it has a huge impact on what a lot of municipalities have as a backlog on their infrastructure. And most importantly, these are jobs out there that we need more than ever. These are jobs that in our communities, these are projects where people are going to be working, where we can create opportunities. We just approved a community benefits framework as well to include in many of these projects. These are jobs and opportunities. This will help us with our recovery. The other two pressures that we have on the refugees money, there's been a few budgets with this, and I'll just say this here, and I might even move a motion at council. I think it is time that we work with the federal government on a program to actually deal with this issue once and for all, that they come to the table and address this in a sustainable way, and that we put forward a program that we don't have this as a pressure every year, because also this is not a response to our settlement services. I don't think anybody feels proud that we're allowing people to come to this country and then don't have the appropriate mechanisms to house them in the appropriate way. With the last one, which is the supportive housing, we have 1,200 units of supportive housing, unheard of, that we can bring and build and through purchasing to have available this year. This is a huge, huge pressure that we have in our city, that the federal and ourselves have come together and saying, we have the bricks and mortars, we have that housing first approach. However, as we've seen with many of these projects, it is essential that we have the support services. This is an area that is the purview of the provincial government. This is very much related with healthcare supports. So I agreed with everything that Councillor Layton was saying. There was only one thing that I didn't agree, that he said, we will fail. No, we will not fail. The provincial government will fail the residents of Toronto. The provincial government will fail the residents of Ontario, because the support services is the most financially responsible way of dealing with this issue, and is also the most humane way of dealing with this issue. We know that if they want to be respectful with all Ontarians' tax dollars, this is the way we need to provide the health supports, the supports to make sure that people are housed and they change paths. And so our advocacy will continue. Our work will continue. This is an important work that we need to do to continue to advocate with the federal and provincial government. Mayor, I know that you're very committed with this, and I am sure that you have the entire council behind you on these items and these important items that we need to ensure we have the attention of our partners to ensure the success of our city.
Thank you very much, Deputy Mayor Barlow. Others wishing to speak? I don't see any other hands, so I will just say a few words then, if I might, and I have two motions. The first is a motion that speaks to the money that I talked about earlier this morning, the $8 million financed by a special dividend that we would have declared by the Toronto Parking Authority to finance investments in jobs, extra jobs for young people in hard-hit COVID-19 areas, extra mental health supports for the COVID hard-hit neighborhoods, and extra supports for the hard-hit neighborhoods with respect to internet access, and then $2 million there, and then $1 million for to hopefully bring about help bring about a more successful launch of small businesses and Main Street businesses when they reopen. The second motion is one that is an accounting motion, but an important one, and it would cause the city to commit $1.238 billion in funding towards the cost of the Eglinton East Light Rail Transit project through the following, which is a redirection of the Scarborough Subway Extension levy monies that were collected, $880 million, and a redirection of some remaining funding within the original Scarborough Subway Extension budget in capital funding, and that the Council would direct the City Manager and CFO to inform the provincial and federal governments of the City's funding commitment and request their financial support for that project. I think that's an important initiative about which I will have more to say, as I'm sure might some of the Scarborough councillors, but it's an important project for the whole city because it represents, it travels through 7 priority or neighbourhood improvement areas and services a huge campus, and on the list goes, but we'll talk about that more later. And I will just say with respect to the $8 million that I think these are investments we can make now that are going to make a difference now to groups that have disproportionately affected or suffered the burdens of the pandemic, and can do it in a way that continues with our practice of prudent financial management for the city. And I want to focus on that expression just for a minute because that is what we've done, and that is not just what we've done claimed by any politician, a mayor, a budget chief, or anybody else. It is what the credit rating agencies and those who finance the ongoing operations of our city beyond the taxpayers, but I think they too would say the city has been prudently financially managed. You know, I mean, one of the things you learn in this job is that there will be those who say you didn't say no often enough and you spent too much, and there'll be those who say you're spending too little, and you'd like to end up in a position where you have the confidence of the majority of the population that you're trying your very best to do the right thing and to achieve that balance. And I think most people would describe that as prudent financial management. I looked up the definition of prudent, and it says careful with thought for the future. And so that it is within that context that I would say to you that I will continue to resist those on the council who suggest that we can just increase the debt. Just increase the debt. It's not a problem. You can always borrow more. And it's true, you know. We all know that. We all know you can borrow and borrow and borrow. But eventually there's a price to be paid for that. And we've heard that while it isn't a certainty, nothing is certain in these kinds of things, that you would, for example, lose the credit rating and cost ourselves tens of millions of dollars in additional interest and principal charges to repay that debt, because all debt, as we know, eventually has to be repaid. That would simply defeat the purpose of borrowing the money. And it doesn't solve operating problems anyway. And so at the end of the day, I don't accept that. I don't accept the notion of spending cuts at all. And I think when you look at the overall record in some of the areas where budgets fluctuated this year, the bottom line is, and the facts show that we have preserved services, we have protected services, we have given increases where there were areas of the greatest need for people who were most vulnerable. And in fact, we've avoided service cuts, which could have been the answer to a horrible problem that we were first informed about almost back in March or April when we first started to meet to talk about the 2021 budget. And then with an eye to the future as well, we've already begun talking about the 2022 budget. We've begun meetings on that even earlier than ever because there are pressures that will continue to exist next year. There are pressures that will come upon us for the first time, such as, and this is a joyous thing in a certain way, but the operating expenses, for example, of the Eglinton Crosstown. It's going to be a great occasion to open a huge new transit line like that, but it carries its operating expenses with it, and on the list goes from there. And so I don't accept the notion that we should use service cuts, but I also don't accept the notion that and again, there are people who just say, oh, just raise taxes more than you're doing. It's not a problem. People will get over it. Now, the fact of the matter is that the TOR report itself, where we went out and asked people, said they were just not in a position to absorb tax increases at this time. And beyond what we did, which was a very modest increase at the rate of inflation. And there were some who said we shouldn't even do that. And so I think that what we have here is a budget that kind of tries to do what you have to do, which is to, and by the way, I and the budget chief, we actually have responsibility to be accountable for this, to the people, first and foremost, all the people in my case. I was elected across the city, yes, and to the business community and to the financial people who finance the city's operations and to a host of others. And so you don't find me making a lot of claims or asking for a lot of things to be done that I don't think are going to be in the best interest of the city, being careful and looking to the future, which is the definition of prudent. So I want to just finish by thanking two people in particular. And this is not to make the city manager feel left out. I've had plenty of occasions to praise him as being just one of the best executives that I've ever worked with. But I've worked with a lot of financial executives in different responsibilities I've had as the managing partner of a big law firm, as the CEO of a big company. I've never worked with one more capable than our Chief Financial Officer and Treasurer, Heather Taylor. And she leads a team of people. Steve has been mentioned in particular. We spent a lot of time with him. And there are others, a whole host of people who work on this. But Heather is the leader, and she is just an excellent public servant and an excellent financial executive and somebody who understands about a careful financial management and making sure that the city is strong and is equitable, but lives to fight another day and to have a strong recovery. And then the other person I want to just pay tribute to is Councillor Gary Crawford. You know, when you take on a job like the budget chief, when you're asked to take it on, I think you normally would expect you don't have to have it for more than a given period of time. And he too, with again, a very excellent staff, including Monique, who was with us in most of our meetings going all the way back to February, he's got just the right temperament for this job. He's calm, he's cool, he's level-headed, he's common sense, and he's compassionate. And those are all important qualities to have when you're a budget chief, because you need to be compassionate too. And so I just want to say thank you to the two of them and to all the members of the committee and all the public servants who've helped to get us to today. And we've got the council debate yet to go, which will be, I'm sure, stimulating and hopefully constructive. And I'll look forward to that. But for today, I commend to you these motions and the entire budget for your approval so that we can send it on to the City Council as amended by motions that will be, I assume, or not, passed here as we proceed to that. So thank you. Anybody else that wants to have a word? Okay. Well, then what we'll do is we'll consider the motions, and I think what we'll do is get at the outset have the votes taken on the clauses that I have declared a conflict on, and just have that done at the outset, or does that only come after we've passed all the motions? All right, then we'll deal with the motions. Let me just see if I can get them in some order here. I have. Pardon me. We've got them in an orderly pile? Okay, as opposed to my disorderly pile. Thank you very much. Motion 1, which we'll ask Catherine to put up on the screen, moved by Councillor Crawford, to do with corporate real estate management. A number of matters related there. He spoke to that. So I will then thank you for putting it up and ask for the screen back so I can see the members of the committee. And I'll call the question. All those in favor? Opposed? Carried. Carried unanimously. Motion 2A, moved by Deputy Mayor Michael Thompson, to do with the library operating budget. And again, this will go up very quickly so you can see it. Addressing an issue in Councillor Bradford's riding. There it is. And I'll go back to the council member's screen if I can. And I'll call the question. All those in favor? Opposed? Carried. Motion 2B, moved by Deputy Mayor Thompson, to do with mostly a technical matter to do with the social development, finance and administration entering into an agreement. We'll call that, put that up on the screen. There you see it. Back to the voting screen. If I can ask, call the question. All those in favor of motion 2B, all those in favor, opposed, carried. Motion 3 from Councillor McKelvey to do with the funds for the ravine strategy, et cetera, and also the Wildlife Centre. Put that up if we can. All right. We'll go back to the voting screen if we can. And I'll call the question. All those in favor? Opposed? All carried unanimously. Thank you. Motion 4 from Councillor Pasternak, which is to do with the Downsview Community Centre. And we'll put that up. There we have it. And I'll call the question. All those in favor? Opposed? Carried. Motion 5 from Councillor Ainsley to do with the erosion risk management on Livingston Road.
Recorded vote, please.
Recorded vote, okay. Did we put it up? There we are. Just put it up for 1 sec, and then we'll come back to the recorded vote. And Catherine can get ready for that. There we go.
All those in favor? Raise your hand, please. Councillor Ainsley? All those opposed? Mayor Tory? Councillor Balau? Councillor Thompson? Councillor Pasternak? Deputy Mayor Minnan-Wong? Councillor Crawford? And Councillor McKelvey. That loses 7-1.
Thank you, Catherine. Motion 6A. This is the investment of the $8 million offset or financed by the special dividend from Toronto Parking Authority for the purposes mentioned in the remarks. I'll have that put up for a moment. Doesn't seem to be coming up just a moment, so we'll give it 1 second and then we can move forward. I think people have seen it and we've had a chance to digest it. All right, I'll call the question on that if you're ready. All those in favor? Opposed? Carried. Thank you. Then motion 6B, which is the motion to do with the reallocation of the $1.238 billion from the Eglinton subway funds, if I can call it that, to the Eglinton East Light Rail Transit Project. And we'll show that.
We have a recorded vote, please.
Sure. Thank you.
All those in favor? Mayor Tory? Councillor Balau? Councillor Thompson? Councillor Ainsley? Councillor Pasternak? Deputy Mayor Minnan-Wong? Councillor Crawford? And Councillor McKelvey. That is unanimous.
So does that now bring us to dealing with the portions? So Deputy Mayor Minnan-Wong, if I could ask you to take the chair and take us through the approval, and does he have a copy of what I have here? Okay, of the 2 areas that I declared an interest in, and I will absent myself from the meeting, and then come back and we'll deal with the rest of the budgets.
All right, thank you very much. On the item as amended as it pertains to funds allocated to the provision of telephone, wireless, internet, and television services in the 2021 Information and Technology Operating Budget, the Toronto Police Services Budget, the Toronto Transit Budget, and the Toronto Community Housing Corporation. All those in favor?
Recorded?
Okay. Recorded vote, please.
All those in favor? Councillor Balau? Councillor Thompson? Councillor McKelvey? Councillor Ainsley? Councillor Pasternak? Deputy Mayor Minnan-Wong? And Councillor Crawford. That carries unanimously, 7-0.
Thank you. On the item as amended as it pertains to funds allocated for the provision of news summary services provided by Canada Newswire
in the 2021 Strategic Communications Budget. All those in favor?
Recorded.
Recorded vote, please. All those in favor?
Councillor McKelvey? Councillor Ainsley? Councillor Pasternak? Deputy Mayor Minnan Wong? Councillor Crawford? Councillor Thompson? And Councillor Balau. That carries unanimously, 7-0.
Thank you very much. I believe my job is done. Is the mayor stepping back?
Your job is never done, Mr. Deputy Mayor, but having said that, that portion of it for this morning is, or this afternoon it now is, or it's about to be this afternoon. So we have one more motion to deal with, which is the overall motion to approve as amended, the recommendation moved by Councillor Crawford with respect to the rest of the capital and operating budgets, other than the clauses you just voted on in my absence. And so I think we're ready to call the question on that, and we'll have a recorded vote on that.
All those in favor in regards to the balance of the item as amended? Mayor Tory? Councillor McKelvey? Councillor Ainsley? Councillor Pasternak? Deputy Mayor Minnan Wong? Councillor Crawford? Councillor Balau? And Councillor Thompson. That's unanimous.
Thank you very much. So I think that completes our business for today, unless anybody has any other business. And again, I'll thank the members of the Budget Committee as well. I certainly paid tribute, and properly so, to Councillor Crawford and to our Chief Financial Officer. But the Budget Committee worked hard on this, and that includes members who are not members of this committee, the councillors from who are part of the Budget Committee. I want to thank them for their work. And on we go to Council. And so we will look forward to those discussions next week.
Do you have any?
And on that note, I will thank you all, and we'll declare the meeting adjourned. Thank you.